so scary, isn't it? I know some people are very shy or grew up in a culture in which it was considered rude to look at other people and to see their eyes. And in the animal kingdom, it's considered a tremendous challenge to look at another animal. It's a measure of subservience when you lower your head to the animal, just as it is in the sense when you bow to other people. You are acknowledging respect for their power. But in here, I think it's important to see each other. The nature of nurture. What does that mean? Well, let's begin with the idea of nurture, which is another way of saying to tend to someone or something. Generally speaking, we think of nurturers as people who care, people who love someone or something. In fact, I wonder if it's even possible to nurture anyone or anything if we do not really care about it. Can you imagine someone nurturing you who doesn't care about you at all? Has no feeling for you? I don't really think that can be done. It's like when someone touches you who doesn't love you. It feels completely different from the way it is when someone does love you and touches you. Barbara D'Angelo was a psychotherapist who was very popular in the late 80s and 90s. And she wrote a comment in a book that I read, and I still remember it, something to the effect of, you can lie with your lips, but you cannot lie with your hands. Think about that. Think about the many ways that people touch each other. In a casual way, an intensely personal way, a passionate way, an angry way. I think you can feel people's feelings when they touch you. And I hope you remember that when you're touching other people, that the feeling comes through your hands. It's so easy, it's so easy to say something but not really mean it because you're not feeling it. It's one of the reasons, I think, why in Unitarian Universalism we talk about deeds, not creeds. We talk about actions speaking louder than words. And your hands, of course, are one of the most active parts of you as a person. Think about abandoned children in factory-like orphanages. Think of chickens in cramped cages. Perhaps the chickens and the birds are being raised, but they are not being nurtured. Nurturing involves that touching. Scientists learned the importance of touch decades ago when they were working with newborn chimps. Do you remember learning about chimps and their need to have a mother object to touch? Without touch, the chimps would simply not thrive. Surrogate mothers appeared. They were made as cloth chimps that workers could hold close to their bodies while holding the chimps as well. And the chimps could cling to the substitutes with the hands of the workers holding the chimps. I think it's important to consider that nurturing is an act of creation. It is an act of creating a feeling person or a thriving animal or plant. It can also be an act of creating a thriving community, a community that you are nurturing and tending to. It requires us to pay attention, which is how psychiatrist M. Scott Peck defines love. And I firmly believe in that definition. Love is paying attention. If you're not paying attention to someone, how on earth can you love that person? You may recall a book from 1973, dating myself here, called The Secret Life of Plants. It was written by two men. One of them, I think his name was Christopher Bird. The other one's name I've forgotten. But it suggested that we should speak to plants and play music for them when tending to them. Now, this book was widely trashed by scientists, botanists, and so on as absolute nonsense. But you know, that hasn't stopped me from talking to my plants when I water them and patting them into the soil, you know, and moving them around the house so they get the most light because I'm nurturing my plants. Now, I want to tell you a story about a film. More than 50 years ago, a teacher showed an elementary school class a film whose name was unpronounceable. Perhaps you saw it. It was a black and white film, and occasionally you heard an elderly woman murmuring. She was the only person in the film. What you saw were her back and her hands. She was using the hands to put soil into a flower pot and then to push a seed down into it. She watered it and then put the flower pot on a windowsill. In the background, far away, was an urban scene. Obviously, she was in a city. The days passed, and she murmured, and she watered, and she turned the pot around so that whatever was going to come up would get lots of sunlight. Over time, a small stem rose out of the soil. It grew, and then came the leaves. In a magical sequence, a few beans began to form along the branches, hanging down off the branches. Finally, the class could see what had been growing in that pot. It was a string bean plant. And the name of the movie was Le Haricot, the French word for string bean. Now I asked the question, did the bean know that it was going to grow into a tall plant? This makes me think about tiny acorns and the question, does an acorn know it's going to grow into a mighty oak? Think about that. The acorn is only this big. And it can grow to be what, 60 feet high, 70 feet high, depending on the forest? And what about a baby? Does a baby know what it's going to become? Now the plant gave birth to new beans, but it was the old woman who actually nurtured and raised the plant so that that could happen. This is an important distinction because it reminds us that Mother Nature, which is an odd construction of two words, is a metaphor for creation. But Mother Nature does not nurture. Think about that. Nature creates, but it does not nurture. And it's true that not all animal mothers, including humans, are effective nurturers either. Some are not interested. Some are incapable. Some are just dysfunctional. Fortunately, we are coming to realize that men are nurturers too, as are siblings and grandparents, other relations, mentors, teachers, healers, friends, ministers. All of them are nurturers. When I open worship saying we come together to explore the eternal, to nurture the internal, and to grow in courage and wisdom, to find ways to heal our broken world, I think about how we tend to ourselves, to each other, and to our communities. So often we tend to one of those categories, but not to the other two. Many people fail to tend to themselves, to nurture themselves, to love themselves. Many of them fail to do that with the other people in their life. They have no sense of connection. They haven't formed a way to bond with other people. Some of us in different communities fail to nurture, fail to tend to things. I used to say as well in opening words that here you will be cared for, and here you will be asked to care for others. In a community, the caring is mutual. If it's not mutual, there's something missing in that community. Community means common, shared. And nurturing involves sharing. The song we sang that Linda picked was perfect for this. seeking the love in others, sharing your love with others. Now, I would say that this kind of sharing relates very closely, as I said, to creativity. Creativity is part of the life experience, just as destruction can be part of the life experience. I've written up some questions for you in terms of thinking about creativity, and I'd like you to spend some time now in little groups around the room, because I know you like to talk when I'm not talking. And I'm going to hand out a list of 5 questions. I want you to, choose one person to read the questions, because I only made a sheet for each group. And then see what you come up with in your discussion about them. I'm going to read you the questions now, so you're not panicked going into your group. The first question is, what are you building, painting, composing, or planting in your life? The second one is, when was the last time you created or helped to create something that will outlive you? That is a really big question. Number 3, how has failing at something helped you to move forward or to create something new? Number 4, what around you needs to be put back together? And number 5, are your decisions in your life based on fear or on creativity and nurturing? What might happen if you began each day deciding what you would nurture in that day's hours? As Thich Nhat Hanh says, I welcome a new day, another 24 hours. So I'm going to ask you, I'm going to show you, but we're going to divide into 5 groups of about 5, and I'll ask you by numbers to go to different corners in the room, and just drag your chairs with you, turn them around so you can sit in a circle and see each other. So, Nancy, we're going to start with you. Number 1, Greg, number 2, Ruth, 3, 4, 5, and now 1,
2, 4,
and then you 5. 1, 2. Okay, you're number 1 back. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. And yes, Anthony, number 1. And then now you are number 2, number 3, number 4, number 5, 1, 2, 3. I'm going to throw you in, James. You can't hear? No?
That's why I'm trying to find a place where I can hear it. So just go ahead.
Okay. 4, 5, yes? 1, 2, 3. Okay, James, I want you to get into a group with, what did we get to, number 4? Yeah, okay. So the 1s can meet over here, the 2s back there, the 3s over there, the 4s over here, and the 5s somewhere in the center.
I was talking to Eileen, I'm sorry. It is all good, though.
Yeah, good.
It's all good.
Have you ever considered these questions before? No. Did anybody want to share anything that came up in your group? Anything that was new or different? Or even same old, same old? Barb?
We were talking about it, and I must say, Caitlin told us about, apparently, that when you pass away, if you're cremated, you can be put into an urn that sprouts to a tree.
Oh, yeah.
So I thought that was kind of cool.
Well, you know,
Just sharing with everybody.
yeah, that's like the idea of putting ashes on rose plants, and ashes on anything that's growing. Mm-hmm. What kind of bush do you want to come back as? Or a tree?
Our Bonnie, I think Barbara G knows more about this, but our Bonnie has found a grave site for herself where you don't get involved and they wrap you in something.
Oh yeah, a shroud. Yeah, green. These are green burials, they're called. Yeah.
But there's something in the shrouds to encourage mushrooms, isn't there? No. Oh, I thought it was to speed the... Oh, it's a different way. Oh, okay. Option B.
Yes, Jim.
My wife's ashes, I
Jim is sharing something.
My wife's
Those of you who are talking among yourselves. Jim?
My wife's ashes I deposited in Barnegat Bay when I was out sailing one day.
Uh-huh.
So there's probably a number of Jersey blue claw crabs that have some component.
Blue claw crabs, okay. My father went into the Gulf of Mexico. I don't know what he's feeding, but that's where he wanted to go.
Gail
Anything
went
else?
to Barnegat Bay.
Huh?
Gail went to Barnegat Bay with her son and her sisters as well.
Maybe you'll think about these questions, in the days ahead. I still think about them, and I was in this conversation with a lot more questions, and 20 ministers, and, ministers can go on forever with these questions. I'd like to read you something that I found while I was pulling something out of a hymnal, and unfortunately I don't know who wrote it. I'm going to have to look for that when I get home. I think it ties into today. When you say to one another, I love you, be able to say, I love in you everyone. I love through you the world. I love life. I love in you also myself. As you hold each other, know you are held in a larger embrace. We are all connected, and your choice of commitment affects us all. Your commitment strengthens our fidelity to one another, for we depend on one another more than we know. Make your love for one another enlarge your embrace to love people, the earth, life, and yourselves. So much is possible. May love, wherever it is found, be celebrated and recognized. If you promise with your heart, say yes, and promise them with your mind and your spirit, saying yes. So when you say to one another, I love you, be able to say, I love in you everyone. I love through you the world. I love life. I love in you also myself. May it be so. And now we're going to take the offering.